Welcome to Moving Experiences. I'm Mark Canada, professor, author, and founder of Mind Inclined. In these virtual tours, which you can take to the places I'm visiting or just enjoy on your own on the treadmill or in your neighborhood, I hope to inform and entertain you with insights and stories about the culture and the history of the places that we're visiting. But I hope that we can go even farther, so to speak. What better place to start a series of moving experiences than a road? And not just any road, the Via Appia, or as we say in English, the Appian Way, the greatest road of the ancient world. This engineering marvel, stretching south from Rome and all the way to the heel of the Italian boot on the eastern shore, is older than the Great Wall of China, and it has a rich history, which we will explore on our walk today. We'll see some of the remnants of this history and imagine others. Finally, I will encourage you to think more broadly about going places in your own life and the ways you take to get to them. We're starting our walk here next to the Via de Messencia. He was one of the emperors of Rome back in the early 4th century. The palace was the residence of the living emperor, where, in richly decorated basilican type, he was paid homage by his subjects in much the same way as he was applauded by the people in the court and the circus, where games were played in his honor. We could have started in downtown Rome, but between here and there, it's kind of suburban, doesn't feel very much like the ancient road. We'll start here, and soon we'll be seeing the road and getting a sense of the way it looked way back when it was begun. Nearby, also on the left as we walk south on the Appian Way, is another tomb, a particularly grand one for someone far less famous than a Roman emperor. As an inscription here indicates, the tomb is that of Cecilia Metella, daughter of Quintus Metellus Creticus, wife of Crassus. If you know Roman history, you recognize the name Crassus, which belonged to a very wealthy Roman who wound up serving in the first triumvirate with Pompey and Julius Caesar. This Crassus, however, was not Licinius Crassus, the triumvir, but perhaps his son. Constructed perhaps around 25 BC, it once had a dome above the part we see here. Sartorio speculates the grandeur of her tomb must have been more an affirmation of her class, the gens, than of her individual person. Some parts of the structure are not original. It was later converted to serve as a fortress, and we see remnants of the adaptation when we view the structure as it exists today. Okay, now that we've seen some of the early highlights, let's really hit the road. The Queen of Roads, in Latin, the Regina Viarum. Before we get into the purpose and history of this magnificent road, I encourage you to take in this moment. We are stepping, physically or virtually, into space that has been occupied by countless human beings making and living history over the last 2,000 plus years. We're going somewhere, just as those fellow men, women, and children were going their own ways. Later, I'll have more to say about ways and destinations, but for now, let's just live in this moment, our own moment in history. In some historic spots, especially a few miles behind us in downtown Rome, it can be difficult to feel alone with our thoughts because we are surrounded by thousands of other people walking and talking, as well as buskers, tour guides, cars, buses, pets. The Appian Way, because it is outside the city and is not as well known as, say, the Colosseum, is far less crowded. You can enjoy more mental space for imagination and contemplation. Like other roads, the Appian Way was a means to an end, specifically a means of reaching an area south of Rome. In the 4th century BC, Rome saw the Samnites who lived in this region as rivals and coveted the rich agricultural land that the Samnites occupied. Even then, long before Caesar and Trajan, Romans, some of them anyway, employed military aggression to achieve their ends. Moving troops and equipment in those days of horse-pulled carts and good old-fashioned boots on the ground was slow and arduous. A Roman official stepped up to make travel much easier with a paved road. That official's name was Appius Claudius, and the project would be named for him. even though, according to one source, he didn't get the Senate's approval and then went and burned through the public funds. An early Roman example of the fact that it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. Work began on the road in 312 BC. It is one of the earliest of the famous Roman construction projects, predating by centuries the Pantheon, the Colosseum, Nero's Domus Aurea, and the Baths of Diocletian. The ambition and prowess that would underlie many of Rome's great achievements, however, can be seen in this very early project. The first leg of the road extended more than 100 miles south all the way to Capua. And as you can see in this stretch right here, it was remarkably straight. This design was certainly logical. We all know that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, so anyone traveling this road, soldiers notably, would conserve time and energy taking this straight route, as opposed to taking a more circuitous route. Indeed, the almost perfectly straight Appian Way allowed soldiers to travel about 25 miles in a day. The cost of this speed was paid by the builders, poor guys, who sometimes had to move heaven and earth, or at least a lot of earth, to continue a straight road over valleys and rivers. In fact, one calculation says that they had to move 1.6 billion cubic feet of earth before they would actually start building the road itself. When it came to crossing areas such as valleys, Nick Orsi, writing for Engineering Rome, explains, the Romans had several options to cross these points. One was to fill the river or valley with stones or debris, which retained the straightness of the road but diverted the flow of the river. Another option was to follow the river or valley from the above or side embankments, which resorted to curving the road and adding travel time. The last option was to bridge over the river or valley. The Romans usually picked whatever the cheapest option was. Well, I guess some things never change. Who were these builders? Well, remember, we're talking about ancient Rome. The heroes behind this marvel were, as Robert Castor put it, slaves and criminals who were not expected to survive the experience. Castor, author of The Appian Way, Ghost Road, Queen of Roads, explains that being condemned to build and maintain the roads was considered a punishment that ranked with being condemned to work the mines or to face the beasts in the arena. Modern analyses differ, but varying accounts agree that the road consisted of multiple layers made up of materials such as stones, sand, and gravel. Gravel may have been the surface of much of the road for centuries, although today we see some large paving stones which were probably added later. In Engineering Rome, Orsi explains, the final layer added to the Via Appia after its original construction was the pavement, or the Summa Christa. This layer involved 6-inch thick igneous rocks, usually basalt, with a diameter of about 1 foot each. These were cut into irregular polygons and fit together with such delicacy as to form a completely smooth surface. A slightly elevated center of the road facilitated drainage. The road was wide enough for 2 carts pulled by animals, moving in opposite directions, to pass each other, and there also was an area on the side for pedestrians to travel. The width of the road varied, depending partly on the terrain. For example, when it skirted a mountain, it might be only about 8 feet wide. In other parts, it was about 13 feet wide. Close to Rome, where there naturally was a lot of traffic, it was about 30 feet wide. This initial stretch that we've been traversing was just the beginning of the Appian Way. Over the next 50 years or so, it was extended some 350 miles in total, so that it stretched all the way to the east coast of Italy. A major road for a major civilization is likely to be the site of a lot of history, especially when it stands for more than 2,000 years. Back in 44 BC, a teenager traveled this road on his way to Rome after the assassination of Julius Caesar. This wasn't just any teenager, though. Caesar was his great-uncle, and more important, had chosen the youth to be his heir. That teenager's name was Octavian, but you know him as Augustus, the name he went by after defeating his rival Mark Antony and becoming Rome's first and greatest emperor. The Queen of Roads carried more than just soldiers and a future emperor. Legend has it that St. Peter was fleeing Rome on the Appian Way, and then he encountered the risen Christ and asked him Domine, quo vadis? And Christ said, I'm going to Rome to be crucified again. Peter stopped fleeing and returned to Rome, where he himself would be crucified. A church still standing on the Appian Way, not far behind us, takes its name, Quo Vadis, from this story. It was also the site of a ghastly display ordered by Licinius Crassus, who in 72 and 71 BC had crushed the slave rebellion led by Spartacus. In true Roman fashion, he had more than 6,000 people, ostensibly involved in this uprising, crucified along the Appian Way. Much closer to our own time, American soldiers traveled the Appian Way on their way to Rome in World War II. For all of its beauty and historical significance, the Appian Way does not attract nearly as many visitors as other parts of Rome. National Geographic reported that before the pandemic, about 100,000 people visited the Appian Way per year. The Colosseum attracted more than 7 million. One reason is that this well-beaten path is off the more currently beaten paths of downtown Rome. As I mentioned at the beginning of this tour, you need to catch a ride to it. The portion we are walking is part of a public park called the Parco de Appia Antica. How much of our lives, our thoughts, our attention, our emotions are wrapped up in ways, in the process of moving from one place or one state of being to another? Our modern word way is actually related to the Latin word via, as in via Appia, that is the Appian Way. Whether we are talking about a way to do something, a way to live, or the way to the library, we ultimately are referring to means, that is, the link between where we are and where we are going or where we want to be. That's a powerful notion, and I think it's why roads and paths and ways figure so prominently in poems, such as Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken and Walt Whitman's Song of the Open Road, along with songs, movies about road trips, and more. How much of our lives, our thoughts, our attention, and our emotions are wrapped up in ways, the plan and the process of moving from one space, one state of being to another? We often use the metaphor of moving or traveling when we speak of things that would seem to have no relation to either. When we achieve an initial success, someone might tell us, "You're on your way." When we are unsure of some aspect of our lives, we might ask, "Where is this relationship going?" Or, "I'm struggling to find my way." We might struggle less and succeed more if we thought as much about our ways as we think about our destinations. It's one thing to dream of becoming an entrepreneur or a professional athlete. It's quite another to plan the route to one of these destinations. When we are focused on our destinations, we may wish to take a straight road to get there as fast as possible, as Appius and his fellow Romans did. But imagine all the things you would have missed in your life if you had taken the straight way. That's the thing about life. We don't ever know all of our options and the value and impact of each of those options until we have seen and experienced them. We will never know if we are traveling on a straight road. You may want to think of life as a highway, as one famous song puts it, but I prefer the phrase from another song, the one by the Beatles, in which Paul McCartney sings about a long and winding road. When we hit the open road, to borrow a phrase from Walt Whitman, we may like to think that we are going toward something, but maybe our true motivation is to leave something. Then again, maybe we're in it simply for the adventure, for the road trip, so to speak. My favorite quotation from the very quotable Yogi Berra is, "You've got to be very careful if you don't know where you are going, because you might not get there." Like other things that Yogi said, this one seems contradictory or even silly, but it's actually profound. If you don't know where you're going, then there is no there. But too often, we go nevertheless. What is there? Do we know? Does it matter? Listen. Do you hear that? There's a party going on the Appian Way, and it might seem as if it spoils the mood, but then when you think about it, if Nero were here, that's where he'd be. I hope you've enjoyed this moving experience along a short stretch of the Appian Way. We have taken in some of its fascinating history, admired its engineering and its construction, and considered some of our own ways and destinations. In future moving experiences, we will run and ride around the National Mall in Washington, D.C., See modern Chicago through the eyes of Theodore Dreiser's Sister Carrie, and explore the literary homes and haunts of Edgar Allan Poe, Louisa May Alcott, Lorraine Hansberry, and Ernest Hemingway in New York's Greenwich Village. Come and have a moving experience with me.